Kiana Jackson stood triumphant in an Atlanta fight pit, sweat glistening as her opponent groaned at her feet, the crowd's cheers shaking the air. But then she froze, clutching a jagged braid in a pristine suburban art room 30 miles north, Trent Carver's laughter slicing through her like a blade. They saw a quiet black transfer student, not the ruthless fighter who'd shatter their world. This moment would spark a war, scarring her future with blood and betrayal. What happens when the prey turns predator? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if you stand for justice against tyranny, hit like and subscribe because tomorrow's explosive episode is one you can't miss. Kiana Jackson slouched in the passenger seat of her mum's rusting sedan, the engine coughing as it rolled into the parking lot of Crestwood High, a sprawling fortress of privilege nestled in a wealthy Georgia suburb 30 miles north of Atlanta's gritty south side. Sunlight glinted off rows of Teslas and polished pickup trucks, their chrome rims flashing like they were flexing for each other, while her mum's faded Honda wheezed to a stop near the curb, a sore thumb amid the gleaming herd. Kiana tugged at the straps of her worn backpack, her jaw tight as she scanned the scene. Manicured lawns stretching toward a brick building with spotless windows, banners flapping above the entrance boasting Crestwood Pride in bold gold, letters, and clusters of kids spilling out of luxury SUVs, their laughter sharp and careless like they'd never known a day of struggle. Her mum, Latrice, gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles pale against her dark skin, eyes fixed on the dashboard as if avoiding the inevitable. "This is your shot, Kai," she muttered, voice low and clipped, the same tone she'd used since the factory job moved them here, from the city's rough edges. "Don't mess it up." Kiana didn't answer, just shoved the door open and stepped onto the asphalt, the heat of late August pressing down like a warning. She adjusted her hoodie, faded grey with frayed cuffs, and started toward the entrance, her sneakers scuffing the pavement as she wove through the crowd. Eyes flicked her way, quick and curious, then slid off like she was a glitch in their perfect picture. She caught snippets of chatter. "New girl. Where's she from?" Whispered behind cupped hands, but no one spoke to her directly. The air smelled wrong here, too clean, like someone had scrubbed out every trace of real life and replaced it with lavender and lies. Back home, the streets hummed with noise, danger, and the kind of respect you earned with your fists, not your daddy's bank account. Here it was all fake smiles and polished floors, a world she didn't belong in but had no choice but to enter. Her mom had drilled it into her. Keep your head down, stay out of trouble, make this work. But Kiana's hands twitched, muscle memory from years of scrapping in underground rings bubbling under her skin, ready to break free. Third period rolled around, and she found herself in art class, a cavernous room with high ceilings and long tables cluttered with paint tubes and sketch pads. She slid into a seat near the back, dropping her bag with a soft thud, her eyes scanning the space like she was casing a fight. The teacher, Ms. Pruitt, a wiry white woman with a pinched face and glasses perched on her nose, barely glanced up from her clipboard as she called roll. "Kiana Jackson," she said, her tone flat like the name didn't matter. Kiana raised a hand, short and sharp, and Pruitt moved on without a second look. The room buzzed with low chatter, kids doodling or scrolling on phones, until the door swung open and 3 figures swaggered in, late but unbothered. Trent Carver led the pack, a 6'2" football star with a jawline carved from arrogance and blonde hair swept back like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Behind him trailed Jake, shorter and stocky with a buzz cut, and Miles, lanky with a permanent smirk curling his lips. They moved like they owned the place, and the way heads turned, they might as well have. Trent's eyes landed on Kiana, narrowing slightly as he took in her hoodie, her tight braids spilling over her shoulders, her stillness. He dropped into a seat 2 tables over, Jake and Miles flopping down beside him, their chairs scraping loud against the tile. "Charity case," Trent muttered, just loud enough for her to hear, his voice dripping with venom. Jake snorted, leaning back with his arms crossed while Miles flicked a pencil across the table, letting it roll toward her. Kiana didn't flinch, just kept her gaze on the blank paper in front of her, pencil gripped tight in her fist. She'd heard worse back home, slurs slung like punches in alleys where she'd learned to hit back harder. But this wasn't home, this was a game she didn't know yet, and she wasn't about to play it blind. Miss Pruitt clapped her hands, calling the fee. Class to order, her voice thin and reedy as she rattled off the day's assignment. Free draw whatever inspires you. Kiana started sketching, rough lines forming a clenched fist, the only thing she could think of without exploding. Around her, the room settled into a hum of activity, but Trent's table stayed loud. "Ghetto trash," Jake whispered, loud, enough to carry, his eyes darting to her for a reaction. Miles chuckled, low and mean, adding, "Bet she can't even draw straight." Kiana's pencil paused, her knuckles whitening, but she kept her head down, tracing the fist deeper into the paper. She'd promised her mom no fights, no trouble, but the itch in her palms was growing, the old rhythm of violence pulsing through her veins. 10 minutes in, Trent leaned back, stretching like a king on a throne, and grabbed a paintbrush from his table. He twirled it between his fingers, then flicked his wrist, sending it sailing through the air. It landed with a soft clatter on Kiana's desk, bristles wet with blue paint smearing across her sketch. She froze, staring at the streak cutting through her fist, her breath catching in her throat. Trent's laugh broke the silence, sharp and deliberate, like he'd scored a point. "Oops," he said, not even pretending it was an accident. Jake grinned, slapping the table, while Miles leaned forward, eyes glinting with glee. "What's wrong, princess? Too good to clean it up?" Trent taunted, his voice a blade wrapped in silk. The room went quiet, heads turning, waiting for her to crack. Kiana's fingers curled around the brush, her nails digging into her palm as she lifted her eyes to meet Trent's. He smirked, leaning forward, daring her to snap. She could feel it, the heat rising in her chest, the familiar coil of rage she'd unleashed 100 times in dark basements and backlots where blood was the only currency that mattered. Her mind flashed to the ring, the roar of the crowd, as she dropped bigger, meaner fools than this punk. But this wasn't the ring. This was Crestwood, and she was supposed to be invisible. She forced her hand to loosen, dropping the brush back onto the table, the blue smear spreading like a wound. "Not worth it," she muttered under her breath, so low only she could hear, but her eyes stayed locked on Trent's, burning with a promise he didn't yet understand. Ms. Pruitt finally looked up from her desk, frowning at the noise. "Settle down, everyone," she said, her tone bored, her gaze skimming over Kiana's table without stopping. She didn't see the paint, didn't care about the tension crackling in the air. Trent leaned back, satisfied, crossing his arms like he'd won something. "Guess she knows her place," he said, loud enough for the kids nearby to snicker. Jake nodded, muttering, "Yeah, stay quiet, Charity," while Miles kicked his feet up on a chair, grinning like a hyena. Kiana's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding as she forced herself to pick up her pencil again, drawing over the smear, turning it into a shadow under her fist. She'd dealt with punks before, but these ones had something she didn't. Power that didn't come from strength, but from a system she couldn't punch through. Not yet. The bell rang, and the room erupted into motion, kids grabbing bags and bolting for the door. Trent's crew lingered, sauntering out last, brushing past her table close enough for Jake to accidentally bump her shoulder, hard enough to jostle her sketchpad to the floor. "Watch it," he said, smirking as he stepped over it. Kiana bent to pick it up, her fingers trembling with the effort to stay calm, the fist on the page staring back at her like a mirror. She slung her bag over her shoulder and stood, catching Trent's eye as he glanced back from the doorway. He winked, a predator sizing up prey, oblivious to the storm brewing in her silence. She walked out, head high, but inside, her mind was already mapping the battlefield, every whisper and smirk a thread she'd weave into their downfall. They thought she was nothing, just another black girl to break. They were wrong, and she'd make sure they paid for it one way or another. A week had crawled by since Kiana Jackson first stepped into Crestwood High, each day a slow grind of whispers and sideways glances that pricked at her like thorns she couldn't swat away. She'd kept her promise to her mom, Latrice, swallowing every jab from Trent Carver and his pack, letting their words bounce off her like pebbles on pavement. But the air in third period art class felt heavier today, thick with something she couldn't name, a storm brewing behind the polished smiles and lemon-scented halls. She slid into her usual seat near the back, her faded hoodie a grey shield against the room's bright chaos, her braids swaying as she dropped her bag and pulled out her sketch pad. The fist she'd drawn last time glared up at her. It's blue. Smear now a bruise she couldn't erase. A reminder of Trent's paintbrush stunt. She flexed her fingers, the itch to hit something simmering beneath her calm. But she buried it deep, tracing new lines over the page instead. Ms. Pruitt stood at the front, her voice droning as she handed out watercolor sets, her glasses slipping down her nose while she rattled off instructions about blending techniques. Kiana barely listened, her eyes flicking to Trent's table 2 rows over, where he sprawled like a king holding court. Jake sat hunched beside him, cracking his knuckles, while Miles leaned back, twirling a pencil like he was bored of the world. They'd been quieter since the paintbrush incident, their taunts dialed back to muttered slurs and smirks, but Kiana knew better than to trust the lull. She'd seen it before in the ring, the way a fighter circles before the real blow lands. Her pencil scratched across the paper, sketching a coiled snake this time, its fangs bared, ready to strike. She didn't notice Jake slip out of his seat, his footsteps soft as he drifted toward her table, a fake grin plastered on his face. "Hey, Kiana, right?" Jake said, his voice syrupy, leaning over her desk like they were buddies catching up. She glanced up, her hand pausing mid-stroke, every muscle tensing as she clocked the lie in his eyes. "What?" she said, flat and cold, not giving him an inch. He chuckled, scratching the back of his buzzed head, his stance too casual to be real. "Just saying, no hard feelings about last week, you know. Trent's just messing around." Kiana's gaze didn't waver, her silence a wall he couldn't climb, but she caught movement from the corner of her eye. Trent shifting in his seat, his hand dipping into his bag. What was he playing at? She didn't have time to figure it out before Jake stepped closer, blocking her view, his shadow falling over her sketch. "You're good at this art stuff," he said, nodding at her snake, his tone dripping with mockery. "Real talent." She didn't bite, just kept her eyes on him, waiting for the punchline. Ms. Pruitt was busy at the front, chatting with a girl about brushstrokes, her back turned to the room's quiet corners. The other kids doodled or scrolled on phones, oblivious or pretending to be, their laughter a distant hum. Kiana's instincts screamed trap, but she couldn't see the angle yet. Jake lingered, babbling about nothing, his words a smokescreen she couldn't pierce. Then she felt it, a presence behind her, too close, too still. Trent had moved, silent as a ghost, and before she could turn there was a faint snip, a tug at her scalp that hit her like a gunshot. Her hand flew to the back of her head, fingers brushing the jagged ends where one of her thick braids used to be, now severed clean off. Time stopped, the room tilting as she processed the violation, her breath locking in her chest. Trent stepped into view, holding the braid aloft like a hunter with a kill, his perfect teeth flashing in a grin that begged to be smashed. "Lightening your load, princess," he said, his voice loud enough to turn heads, a cruel edge slicing through the words. Jake burst out laughing, slapping his thigh as he backed off, while Miles leaned forward, eyes glinting with savage glee. "Phew, she looks better already," Miles hooted, kicking his chair back. The room erupted, snickers and gasps rippling out from Trent's table, kids craning their necks to see the show. Kiana's hand closed around the frayed stump of her braid, the strands slipping through her fingers like broken promises, her pulse hammering in her ears. They thought she'd cry, run, crumble under their little game. They thought wrong. Her eyes locked on Trent, his smirk a red flag to the beast she'd caged since moving here. Did he really think she'd just sit there? Her chair scraped back, slow and deliberate, the sound cutting through the laughter like a blade through flesh. She stood, towering in her silence, her hoodie hanging loose but her frame coiled tight, every muscle primed from years of breaking bigger fools than him. Trent's grin faltered, just for a split second, but he doubled down, swinging, the braid like a trophy. "What's the matter? Too proud to thank me?" he taunted, stepping closer, daring her to snap. Kiana didn't speak, didn't scream, just moved, her body a blur of instinct and fury. Her fist shot out, catching his wrist mid-swing, twisting it hard until he yelped, the braid dropping to the floor. Before he could pull back, she drove her other hand into his face, a clean hook that slammed his nose into the table with a wet crunch, blood spraying across the wood. The room exploded. Into chaos, screams and shouts bouncing off the walls as Trent crumpled, clutching his face, his perfect features ruined in a heartbeat. Jake lunged, his stocky frame barreling toward her, fists swinging wild. Kiana sidestepped, fluid as water, grabbing his arm mid-punch and yanking it down, her knee smashing into his elbow as she slammed it against a chair's edge. A sharp crack split the air, Jake's shriek piercing the din as he dropped, cradling his arm, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. Miles froze, halfway out of his seat, his smirk gone, eyes wide with something that looked like fear for the first time. Kiana stood over them, breathing steady, her hands loose at her sides, the severed braid lying in the dust like a battle flag. She'd promised no fights, but they'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. What did they expect from a girl forged in Atlanta's shadows? Ms. Pruitt finally spun around, her glasses fogging with panic as she shrieked, "What is going on?" Too late, the damage was done, paint cans toppling as kids scrambled back, some filming with shaky phones, others gaping like they'd seen a ghost rise. Trent groaned, blood pooling under his palms, while Jake whimpered, rocking on the floor. Kiana didn't move, her gaze sweeping the room, daring anyone to step up. No one did. Footsteps pounded down the hall, security guards bursting in, their radios crackling as they zeroed in on her. "Hands up!" one barked, a burly white guy, with a buzz cut, his baton already out. Kiana raised her hands, slow and calm, her eyes never leaving Trent's crumpled form. They thought they'd broken her, humiliated her into submission. Instead, they'd woken something they couldn't control. The guards grabbed her, rough hands, clamping her arms, dragging her toward the door as the room buzzed with whispers. "She's crazy," someone muttered. "They deserved it," another hissed. Kiana didn't resist, her sneakers scuffing the tile as they hauled her out, the braid left behind like a warning. Trent's nose might heal, Jake's arm might mend, but she'd marked them in a way they'd never forget. She'd won this round, or so she thought, her lips twitching with the ghost of a smirk as they pulled her into the hall. But as the door slammed shut, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the opening bell. What happens when a bully's pride turns into a vendetta? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you think Trent had it coming. Hit like if you're rooting for Kiana to keep swinging, and subscribe because the next twist will leave you speechless. How far will Trent's crew go to bury her after this? Kiana Jackson sat rigid in a hard plastic chair, the principal's office at Crestwood High, closing in around her like a cage. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, a sterile contrast to the blood and paint still fresh in her mind from the art room brawl. Her hands rested in her lap, the severed braid clutched tight, its frayed ends brushing her knuckles as she stared at the man across the desk. Mr. Hargrove, the principal, leaned back in his leather chair, his slicked-back hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his pale face creased with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. He was white, middle-aged, and wore a suit so crisp it screamed money, the kind of man who'd never had to fight for anything. Behind him, a shelf groaned, under the weight of golf trophies and framed diplomas, a shrine to his own importance. Kiana's stomach churned, not from fear but from the weight of what she knew was coming. "You've caused quite a mess, Miss Jackson," Hargrove said, his voice smooth as oil, fingers steepled under his chin. He glanced at the braid in her, hand then away like it was trash she'd dragged in. "We don't tolerate violence here. 3-day suspension, effective immediately." Kiana's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding as she held up the braid, its dark strands catching the light. "They cut this off me," she said, her tone low and steady, each word a stone dropped into still water. "That's why I hit them." Hargrove's smirk twitched, his eyes narrowing as if she'd insulted him by speaking. "That's no excuse for assault," he snapped, leaning forward, his chair creaking. "Trent Carver's got a broken nose. Jake's arm might need surgery. You think you can just swing at whoever you want?" She didn't flinch, meeting his gaze head-on, the same way she'd stared down fighters twice her size in Atlanta's underground rings. "They touched me first," she said, her voice cutting through his bullshit like a blade. "Where's their suspension?" Hargrove's lips thinned, his fingers tapping the desk as he leaned back again, dismissing her with a wave. "We'll handle them separately. This isn't about them right now. It's about you." Before she could argue, his phone buzzed. the screen lighting up with a name that made her blood run cold, Senator Carver. Trent's dad. Hargrove snatched it up, his smirk blooming into a full grin as he answered, "Yes, Senator, she's here. No, we're taking care of it. Expulsion's on the table. Absolutely." Kiana's fists clenched, the braid digging into her palm as she realized how deep this went. This wasn't just school. This was power she couldn't punch. The call ended, and Hargrove set the phone down, his eyes glinting with triumph. "You're lucky it's just 3 days," he said, scribbling on a suspension form like it was a victory lap. "Next time you're out for good." Kiana stood, towering over the desk, her shadow stretching across his papers. "Next time? They'll think twice," she said, her voice a quiet threat, but Hargrove just chuckled, waving her off like a fly. The door swung open, and a security guard escorted her out, his grip loose on her arm, like he knew she could break him if she wanted. She didn't look back as they marched her through the halls, past lockers and gawking kids, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. Outside, her mom's sedan idled at the curb, Latrice's face a storm of worry and exhaustion through the windshield. The ride home was silent, the engine's rattle filling the void between them. Latrice's hands shook on the wheel, her lips pressed tight as she stared ahead, avoiding Kiana's eyes. "I called him," she said finally, her voice cracking. "Told him what happened, he didn't care." Kiana nodded, staring out the window at the blur of manicured lawns and picket fences, the suburb's fake perfection mocking her reality. Back in their cramped rental house, a boxy 2-bedroom on the edge of Crestwood, she shut herself in her room. The walls bare except for a cracked mirror and a punching bag swinging from the ceiling. She dropped her bag, the braid still in her fist, and faced the bag, her breaths coming fast and shallow. She'd won in that art room, hadn't she? She'd shown them she wasn't prey. So why did it feel like she'd lost? Her fists flew, pounding the bag with a rhythm born from years of scrapping. Each hit a release of the rage she'd bottled since Trent's scissors sliced through her. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her braids swinging as she danced around the bag, imagining Trent's smug face, Jake's sneer, Hargrove's smirk. She didn't hear the night settle in, the crickets chirping outside, the suburb hushing itself under a blanket of stars. She didn't hear her mum's soft knock, or the way Latrice lingered at the door, watching her daughter fight shadows. Kiana kept swinging, her knuckles raw, her mind replaying the art room, the blood, the chaos. She'd held her ground, made them bleed. That was enough for now, right? She stepped back, chest heaving, wiping her brow with her sleeve, the braid still clutched in her other hand like a talisman. A crash shattered the silence, glass exploding somewhere in the house, followed by her mum's scream piercing the air. Kiana spun, dropping the braid as she bolted out of her room, her sneakers skidding on the hardwood. The living room was a wreck, the front window a gaping hole, shards glittering on the carpet like fallen stars. Latrice stood frozen near the couch, her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with terror. On the floor amid the glass lay a brick, its rough surface smeared with red paint spelling out 2 words, "Go back." Kiana's breath caught, her heart slamming against her ribs as she stared at the message, the hate dripping from it like venom. She stepped closer, glass crunching under her shoes, and picked it up, the weight cold and heavy in her hands. "Who did this?" Latrice whispered, her voice trembling. But Kiana didn't answer, her mind racing back to Hargrove's phone. "Call," Senator Carver's oily voice seeping through the line. This wasn't random. This was Trent's crew, or worse, his dad, flexing muscle she couldn't see. She'd humiliated his son, bloodied his pride, and now they'd brought the fight to her doorstep. Her eyes flicked to the window. The night, beyond it black and endless, hiding whoever had thrown this bomb into their lives. Latrice sank onto the couch, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone to call the cops, but Kiana stayed standing, the brick a dead weight in her grip. She'd thought the art room was the end, a line drawn in the sand. But this was war creeping closer, a warning she couldn't punch away. She dropped the brick onto the coffee table, its thud echoing in the quiet, and moved to the broken window, peering out into the dark. No shadows moved, no cars sped off, just the hum of a suburb pretending nothing was wrong. Her mum's voice cracked behind her, pleading with a dispatcher. "Yes, it's an emergency. Someone threw a brick through our window." Kiana's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms as she replayed Hargrove's smirk, Trent's laughter, the way they'd looked at her like she was nothing. She'd made them bleed, sure, but this was their counterpunch, and it hit, harder than she'd expected. The cops would come, take a report, maybe even patrol the block, but she knew it wouldn't stop here. Not with Senator Carver pulling strings. Latrice hung up, her eyes red as she looked at Kiana, fear and fury warring on her face. "We can't stay here if this keeps up," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kiana didn't answer, just turned back to the window, her reflection staring back from the jagged glass. She'd thought she could keep her head down, play by their rules, but they'd ripped that choice away. The braid lay forgotten on her bedroom floor, a piece of her they'd stolen. But this brick, this was a declaration, a promise of worse, to come. She'd won a skirmish in that art room, but the real fight was barreling toward her, and it wouldn't stop until one side was broken. Her lips curled, not a smile, but something harder, as she whispered to the night, "Bring it." Kiana Jackson stepped off the school bus 3 days later, her suspension finally over, her chin lifted high as she strode toward Crestwood High's gleaming entrance. The morning sun burned hot, casting her shadow long and sharp across the pavement, a warrior returning to a battlefield she'd already bloodied. Her mom, Latrice, had spent the weekend patching the broken window with duct tape and plywood, her hands trembling as she swept glass from the carpet, but Kiana had refused to cower. The brick with "Go Back" scrawled in red paint sat on her. Dresser now, a trophy of their hate, a fuel for her fire. She'd shadowboxed until her knuckles ached, her mind replaying Trent Carver's crumpled face, Jake's shattered arm, the way Miles had flinched. She'd won that round, hadn't she? Made them pay for cutting her braid, for thinking she'd break. Today she'd walk back in and show them she wasn't done. The halls buzzed as she pushed through the double doors, her sneakers squeaking. On the polished tile, her faded hoodie a grey flag against the sea of designer backpacks and bright polos. Eyes followed her, quick and darting, some wide with awe, others narrow with fear. Whispers trailed her like smoke. She smashed Trent's face, heard Jake's in a sling. She's nuts. Kiana kept her gaze straight, her braids swaying with each step, the stump where Trent's scissors had struck a silent badge of her defiance. She caught sight of him near the lockers, Trent Carver himself, his nose swollen and bruised, a purple ring circling one eye. He glared, his perfect blonde hair mussed, his football star swagger dimmed, but he didn't approach. Jake and Miles hovered behind him, Jake's arm in a brace, Miles's smirk replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. Kiana's lips twitched, a flicker of satisfaction warming her chest. They'd learned something, at least. First period dragged, then second, teachers droning through lessons while classmates stole glances at her, their pencils scratching louder when she shifted in her seat. By gym class the air felt lighter, the gym's wide-open space a relief from the claustrophobic stairs. Coach blew the whistle, splitting them into dodgeball teams, and Kiana found herself on the court, her muscles loose and ready. The ball flew and she moved like a storm, dodging with a dancer's grace, her throws hard and precise, nailing opponents square in the chest. A tall black kid named Malik grinned from the sidelines, nodding as she took out a white boy who'd sneered at her last week. "Nice shot," Malik said after, his voice low, respectful. A girl, Tasha, short with tight curls, clapped her shoulder as they headed to the locker room. "You're a beast," she said, eyes glinting with something like pride. Kiana nodded. Back, her guard still up, but a spark of something new flickered inside her. Allies, maybe. A foothold in this whitewashed hell. Lunch came and she sat alone at a corner table, her tray untouched, her mind replaying the dodgeball win, the nods from Malik and Tasha, the way Trent's crew had stayed clear. She'd held her ground, hadn't she? Shown them she wasn't just some quiet transfer to mess with. Her fingers traced the edge of her tray, her breathing steady, a rare calm settling over her. Maybe this was what winning felt like here. Not fists, but presence, a space carved out by fear and respect. She leaned back, letting the thought linger, her eyes scanning the cafeteria's chatter and clatter. Then the doors swung open, and everything shattered. 2 cops marched in, their boots thudding on the linoleum, badges flashing under the harsh lights. The room hushed, forks pausing mid-air, heads swiveling as the officers zeroed in on Kiana's table. "Kiana Jackson?" the taller one barked, a white guy with a buzz cut and a jaw like concrete. She straightened, her pulse kicking up, but she didn't flinch. "Yeah?" she said, her voice steady, though her hands curled into fists under the table. "You're under arrest," he said, pulling cuffs from his belt, his partner circling behind her. "Say assault and battery. Hands where I can see them." The cafeteria erupted, gasps and murmurs rippling out, phones snapping up to record. Kiana's mind raced, replaying the art room, the braid, the blood. "They started it," she said, loud. Enough for the room to hear, but the cop grabbed her wrist, yanking her up, the cold steel snapping shut around her hands. Trent stood across the room, leaning against a wall, his swollen face split by a smirk that made her blood boil. Jake and Miles flanked him, their eyes glinting with triumph, like they'd been waiting for this. The cops dragged her toward the exit, her sneakers skidding as she twisted to glare at Trent. "You set this up," she spat, her voice ablade, but he just shrugged, his grin widening. The taller cop tightened his grip, muttering, "Keep moving," while his partner barked at the crowd to back off. Kiana's eyes darted to Malik and Tasha, standing frozen near their table, Malik's fists clenched, Tasha's mouth open in shock. The doors loomed ahead, and she caught Hargrove's silhouette in the hall, his arms crossed, his smirk a mirror of Trent's. This wasn't justice. This was a trap. They hauled her outside, the sun blinding as they shoved her toward a squad car parked crooked in the lot. Kids pressed against the windows, their faces a blur of shock and glee, some cheering like it was a damn show. "Should have stayed in your lane," the second cop said. A shorter guy with a scar on his cheek, his voice dripping with venom as he opened the car door. Kiana's cuffs bit into her wrists, her shoulders straining as they pushed her inside, the vinyl seat sticking to her hoodie. She twisted to look out, catching Trent's crew high-fiving through the glass, their laughter muted but sharp enough to cut. The taller cop slid into the driver's seat, his radio crackling with static as he muttered something about processing her downtown. The engine roared, and the school shrank in the rear view, a pristine castle hiding a rotting core. Her mind spun as the car rolled through Crestwood's perfect streets, past trimmed hedges and pastel houses, the suburb's mask intact despite the brick through her window, the blood on her hands. She'd thought suspension was the end, that coming back stronger would shut them down. But this? Assault charges? Her stomach knotted, the pieces clicking into place. Senator Carver's call to Hargrove, the way he'd promised expulsion on the table. They weren't stopping at suspension. They wanted her gone, locked up, erased. She leaned her head against the window, the glass cool against her temple, her breath fogging it in short bursts. The video from the art room, the one that should have shown Trent's scissors, Jake's lunge, where was it? Had they buried it, twisted it, made her the villain? The precinct loomed ahead, a squat grey building with bars on the windows, and the cops yanked her out, marching her through a side door into a holding area that stank of sweat and bleach. They uncuffed her long enough to fingerprint her, her hands smudged black as they pressed them to the pad, her mugshot snapping under a harsh flash. She stood tall, her braids framing her face, her eyes burning into the camera, daring it to capture her truth. They locked her in a cell, the bars clanging shut, and she paced, her sneakers scuffing the concrete, her mind racing. She'd beaten. Trent's crew walked back in like a queen, but now she was here, caged while they laughed. The taller cop lingered outside, his radio buzzing with a voice she couldn't place, but his smirk said it all. This was Senator Carver's move, a checkmate she hadn't seen coming. She sank onto the bench, her hands flexing, the ghost of the braid's weight still in her palm. She'd thought she'd won, carved out a piece of Crestwood with her fists, but they'd flipped the board, turned her strength into chains. Her mum would be frantic, calling lawyers she couldn't afford, while Trent's dad pulled strings she couldn't reach. Kiana's lips curled, a bitter edge to her calm. They thought they'd broken her this time, locked her away where she couldn't fight back. But they didn't know her, not really. She'd survived worse than this, clawed her way out of darker pits. This cell wouldn't hold her forever, and when she got out, they'd regret ever picking up those scissors. "What? Do you think Did Kiana deserve to take the fall for standing up? Comment number 1 if you think the system's rigged against her. Hit like if you're raging at Trent's smirk. And subscribe because the next chapter's going to flip this story upside down. How deep does Senator Carver's power run? And what's waiting for Kiana behind those bars? Kiana Jackson sat on the cold metal bench of her juvie cell, the concrete walls pressing in, the air thick with the stench of bleach and desperation. Her wrists ached from the cuffs they'd ripped off an hour ago, her hoodie clinging to her, skin damp with sweat from pacing the 6x8 box. The precinct buzzed beyond the bars, radios crackling, doors slamming, but inside her cell it was just her and the silence, broken only by the drip of a leaky faucet in the corner. She'd been processed, fingerprinted, photographed, her face now a number in their system, but her mind was still on Trent Carver's smirk, the way he'd watched her get hauled off like a prize pig to slaughter. She'd thought walking back into Crestwood High was her win, a middle finger to his crew, but this cell told a different story. Senator Carver's strings reached further than she'd guessed, and she was tangled in them now. Her mom, Latrice, was out there somewhere, scrambling. For bail money she didn't have, probably begging the lawyer who'd turned them away last time when the rent was late. Kiana's stomach twisted, guilt gnawing at her for dragging Latrice into this mess. But rage burned hotter, a fire stoked by every memory of Trent's scissors, Hargrove's dismissal, the brick through their window. She flexed her hands, her knuckles still raw from the punching bag, itching to smash something, anything to claw her way out. The cell door rattled, and she snapped her head up, eyes narrowing as a guard stepped into view, his boots clomping on the concrete. Officer Tate, his name tag read. A wiry white man with a buzz cut and a face like a pit bull, all sharp angles and mean little eyes. He leaned against the bars, twirling his keys, a grin curling his lips that made her skin crawl. "Well, well," Tate drawled, his voice a slow drip of venom. "Look who we got here. Another one of you people, huh? Always ending up in the same place." Kiana didn't blink, just stared him down, her silence a wall he couldn't breach. She'd dealt with his kind before, cops who thought a badge made them gods, who'd hassled her crew back in Atlanta for breathing too loud. Tate's grin widened, his teeth yellowed from chew as he stepped closer, the keys jangling like a taunt. "What's the matter, tough girl? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're just used to this by now?" She stood slow and deliberate, her sneakers scuffing the floor, her frame filling the cell's dim light. "Say what you want," she said, her voice low and steady, "but you don't scare me." Tate chuckled, a dry rasp that echoed off the walls, and leaned in, his breath sour through the bars. "Oh, I don't need to scare you," he said, his eyes glinting with something darker than amusement. "You're already where you belong. Should have stayed in whatever hole you crawled out of." Kiana's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. But she held still, knowing a swing would only tighten the noose. He wanted her to snap, give him an excuse to bury her deeper. She wouldn't play his game. Not yet. Tate lingered, his gaze raking over her like she was meat, then turned away, muttering, "We'll see how long you last," as he sauntered down the hall, his boots fading into the precinct's hum. Minutes stretched into hours, the drip of the faucet her only clock, until a commotion jolted her upright. Voices barked orders, keys clattered, and a new figure loomed outside her cell, a heavy-set girl with tattoos snaking up her arms, her eyes wild and mean. Tate followed, unlocking the door with a smirk, shoving the girl inside. "Play nice, ladies," he said, slamming the bars shut, his grin a promise of trouble as he walked off. The girl sized Kiana up, cracking her knuckles, her lip curling into a sneer. "What you looking at, princess?" she growled, stepping closer, her shadow swallowing the cell's weak light. Kiana didn't flinch, her body shifting into a fighter's stance, loose but ready. "Nothing worth my time," she said, her tone ice-cold. Daring the girl to move, she did. The girl lunged, a meaty fist swinging for Kiana's jaw, but Kiana was faster, sidestepping like she'd danced this dance 100 times. She grabbed the girl's arm, twisting it back, and drove her knee into the gut, a sharp grunt escaping as the girl doubled over. Kiana didn't stop, slamming her elbow into the back of the neck, sending the girl crashing to the floor with a thud that shook the bench. The girl groaned, curling up, her bravado gone, and Kiana stepped back, breathing, steady, her eyes flicking to the bars. Tate's boots echoed back, his face twisting with fury as he saw his little setup fail. "You're a problem," he spat, unlocking the door to drag the girl out, her whimpers fading down the hall. Kiana sank onto the bench, her hands trembling. Now not from fear, but from the rush of dropping another fool who thought she'd fold. Morning crept in, grey light seeping through a high window, and the cell door clanged open again. A different guard, older and bored, muttered, "Bail's posted," and waved her out. Kiana grabbed her hoodie, her steps quick as she followed. Him through the precinct, the weight of Tate's glare burning into her back from a desk across the room. Latrice waited in the lobby, her eyes red, her purse clutched tight, a wad of cash borrowed from God knows where emptying her account. "Let's go," she said, her voice brittle, and Kiana nodded, the silence between them heavy as they climbed. Into the sedan. The drive home was a blur, Crestwood's perfect streets mocking her again, but she felt a flicker of relief. She'd survived the night, beaten Tate's pawn, walked out free. That was a win, right? The sedan rolled into their driveway as dusk painted the sky orange, the plywood still patched over the living room window like a scar. Kiana stepped out, stretching her stiff limbs, her mum trudging inside to collapse on the couch. She lingered, by the car, breathing in the quiet, the crickets starting their song. She'd made it through, shaken off the cuffs, put Tate in his place. Maybe this was the end of it, the system's last swing. She turned toward the house, ready to crash, when a glow flickered in the yard, a strange dance of light she couldn't place. Her heart stopped as she rounded the corner, the smell of smoke hitting her first, then the sight. A cross blazing in the grass, flames licking 6 feet high, its wooden arms wrapped in rags soaked with gas. Latrice's scream ripped through the night, shrill and raw as she stumbled out the front door, her phone slipping from her hands. Kiana froze, the heat stinging her face, the cross's shadow stretching across the lawn like a giant's claw. Neighbors peeked from windows, curtains twitching, but no one came out. No sirens wailed, just her and her mum, staring at a hate so bold it burned their world down. Kiana's eyes watered, not from smoke but from the rage boiling over, a volcano she couldn't contain. She grabbed a garden hose, yanking it free, water hissing as she doused the flames, the cross sizzling. Into a charred skeleton. Latrice sank to her knees, sobbing, "Why us?" But Kiana stayed standing, her hands shaking around the hose, water pooling at her feet. This wasn't random. Tate's words echoed, "Should have stayed in your hole." And she saw it now, his grudge, Senator Carver's reach, Trent's revenge woven into one ugly thread. She'd beaten his girl in the cell, walked out of his jail, and this was their answer, a flaming middle finger to her defiance. The cops arrived late, 2 patrol cars rolling up with lazy lights, officers scribbling notes like it was a parking ticket. "Probably kids," one said, shrugging, while the other kicked at the ashes, avoiding her eyes. Kiana didn't speak, her silence a blade, her mind racing. She'd thought she was free, that surviving juvie was the win, but this cross burned that lie to the ground. They weren't stopping. They'd hit her home, her mom, her everything, and it was worse than cuffs or bricks. She stood in the wet, grasped the night closing in, her sneakers soaked as the cops drove off, leaving them with a soggy lawn and a smoking ruin. Latrice hugged her knees on the porch, her sobs quieting into hiccups, while Kiana stared at the cross, its blackened arms a promise of more to come. She'd fought her way out of one cage, but this was a new beast, one she couldn't punch. Not yet. Her lips curled, a snarl forming as she whispered to the dark, "You want a war? You've got one." They thought they'd scared her off, but they'd just lit the fuse. Kiana Jackson woke to the smell of smoke lingering in her room, the charred memory of the burning cross still clinging to her clothes from the night before. She'd barely slept, her body coiled tight on the sagging mattress, her mind replaying. The flames, her mum's sobs, Officer Tate's smirk through the juvie bars. The plywood over the living room window rattled in the morning breeze, a flimsy shield against Crestwood's hate, and she rolled out of bed, her sneakers hitting the floor with a soft thud. Latrice was already up, hunched over the kitchen table, her eyes sunken as she clutched a chipped mug of coffee. "We can't keep doing this, Key," she whispered, her voice raw, her hands trembling around the ceramic. Kiana didn't answer, just grabbed her backpack, the severed braid still tucked inside, a silent vow to fight back. She'd survived juvie, faced down Tate's thug, but that cross had lit a fire in her she couldn't douse. Latrice had spent the morning on the phone, her voice rising and falling as she begged for help, until she'd found Ms. Ellis, a wiry black lawyer with a reputation for taking on lost causes. Kiana sat beside her mum in Ms. Ellis's cramped office downtown, the walls lined with law books and faded protest posters, the air thick with cigarette smoke and determination. Ms. Ellis leaned across her desk, her glasses perched low, her dark eyes sharp as she studied Kiana. "Assault charges, huh?" she said, tapping a pen against a stack of papers, her voice smooth but edged with steel. "They're saying you attacked those boys unprovoked, but I don't buy it. What's your side?" Kiana held up the braid, its jagged end a stark accusation, and recounted the art room, Trent's scissors, her fists. Ms. Ellis nodded, scribbling notes, her lips curling into a grim smile. "We've got something here," she said, "if we can prove it." Days blurred into a scramble of calls and meetings, Kiana shadowing her mum and Ms. Ellis as they chased evidence. The school's security footage had mysteriously vanished, Hargrove claiming a glitch, but Ms. Ellis didn't flinch. She dug deeper, her contacts whispering about a janitor, Mr. Rawls, a quiet black man who'd been sweeping the halls that day. They found him outside the school, pushing a broom near the dumpsters, his grey uniform blending into the dusk. "I saw it," he muttered, eyes darting, his voice low as he handed over a shaky phone video. "Didn't want to get involved, but this ain't right." The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Trent snipping Kiana's braid, Jake laughing, her slamming them down. Kiana's chest tightened, a spark of hope flaring as Ms. Ellis grinned. "This changes everything," she said, pocketing the phone. The courtroom loomed the next week, a sterile box of wood and white walls 30 miles from Crestwood, the air humming with tension as Kiana sat beside Ms. Ellis, her hoodie swapped for a borrowed blazer that pinched her shoulders. Trent and Jake slumped across the aisle, Trent's nose still swollen, Jake's arm in a sling, their parents glaring daggers from the gallery. Senator Carver loomed in the back, his tailored suit pristine, his face a mask of cold fury as he whispered to Hargrove. The judge, an older white woman with a pinched mouth, called order, and Ms. Ellis stood, her voice slicing through the room as she played Rawls's video on a shaky projector. Gasps rippled through the crowd, Trent's scissors glinting, Kiana's braid falling, her fists flying in self-defense. "This isn't assault," Ms. Ellis said, her tone sharp. "It's survival." The prosecutor, a slick white guy in a cheap tie, sputtered about Kiana's violent tendencies, but the video cut his legs out from under him. The judge's gavel fell, dismissing the charges with a curt, "Evidence speaks for itself." Kiana exhaled, her shoulders loosening as Latrice squeezed her hand, tears glinting in her mum's eyes. Trent's crew glared, their parents muttering threats, but Senator Carver's face was stone, his eyes boring into her like a predator sizing up prey. She'd won, hadn't she? The law had sided with her, cleared her name, sent a message. She walked out of the courthouse, head high, the late afternoon sun warming her face as Ms. Ellis clapped her shoulder. "You're free, kid," she said, her grin wide. "They can't touch you now." Back at Crestwood the next day, Kiana strode through the halls, her sneakers echoing, her braids swaying, the stump a badge of her triumph. Whispers followed, louder now. "She beat the charges. That video's everywhere." Malik and Tasha nodded from their lockers, respect in their eyes while other kids kept their distance, fear flickering in their glances. Trent's crew sulked near the cafeteria, Trent's bruised face twisted with hate, Jake's brace a silent accusation. Miles's smirk gone cold. They didn't speak, didn't taunt, just watched her pass, their silence a wall she'd cracked. She smirked back, a quiet victory pulsing in her chest, her fists loose at her sides. She'd taken their shot and thrown it back, hadn't she? The school felt different, the air lighter, like she'd carved out a piece of it with her own hands. That night, she sat on her bed, the punching bag swaying gently, the brick from the window attack still on her dresser beside the braid. Latrice hummed in the kitchen, A rare sound of peace, and Kiana let herself breathe, her mind replaying the judge's ruling, the video's truth. She'd beaten the system, turned their lies into ash. She stood, stretching, ready to hit the bag, when a boom shook the house, a deafening roar that rattled the walls and sent her staggering. Glass shattered somewhere, Latrice's scream piercing the air, and Kiana bolted out, her heart slamming as she hit the living room. The front window's plywood was intact, but outside a fireball blazed in the street. Ms. Ellis's beat-up sedan engulfed in flames, its hood twisted skyward. Latrice clutched the couch, her eyes wide. "What the hell?" Kiana ran to the door, yanking it open, the heat hitting her face as smoke billowed black against the night sky. Neighbors peeked from porches, phones out, but no one moved closer, the suburb's cowardice on full display. Ms. Ellis stumbled from the curb, her coat singed, her glasses cracked, coughing as she waved Kiana back. "I'm okay," she rasped, her voice shaking. "Just parked it 5 minutes ago." Kiana's eyes darted to the wreckage, the flames licking higher, then to a flicker in the shadows across the street, a figure vanishing into the dark. Her stomach dropped, the victory from court souring in her throat. This wasn't random, this was Senator Carver, his reach stretching beyond jail cells and courtrooms, a lethal counterpunch to her win. Sirens wailed in the distance. Too slow, too late, as Kiana helped Ms. Ellis inside, her mom rushing for water. The lawyer sank onto the couch, her hands trembling, her face smudged with soot. "They're not done," she muttered, her voice low. "Not by a long shot." Kiana's gaze snapped to her dresser where her backpack lay open, and a slip of paper fluttered out, unnoticed until now. She grabbed it, her fingers cold as she unfolded it, the words scrawled in black ink chilling her blood. "You're next." Her breath caught, her fists clenching the note, the room spinning as she connected the dots. The charges dropping, the video, her strut back into school, it had all hit Senator Carver where it hurt. And this was his answer, a bomb to silence her fight. She stepped outside, the fire's glow painting her face, her eyes scanning the dark, for the coward who'd lit the fuse. The cops arrived, lights flashing, but their questions were lazy, their notebooks barely open. "Probably a gas leak," one said, shrugging, while Ms. Ellis glared, her voice cutting through. "That was no accident." Kiana didn't speak, her silence a storm brewing, her mind racing. She'd thought the courtroom was the end, a hollow victory to cling to. But this explosion blew that illusion apart. They'd kill to keep her down, wouldn't they? She crushed the note in her hand, her lips curling into a snarl as the flames died under the firefighters' hoses, leaving a smoking husk in the street. This wasn't over. It was war now, and she'd make them bleed for it. Think Kiana's win was worth the cost? Comment. Number 1. If you're furious Senator Carver's playing dirty, hit like if you're cheering her unbreakable spirit, and subscribe, because the next blow's going to shake this story to its core. What happens when the mob comes knocking at her door? Kiana Jackson stood in the dim glow of her bedroom, the punching bag swaying like a metronome as she wrapped her hands, the tape rasping against her knuckles. The night after Ms. Ellis's car exploded still hung heavy, the stench of charred metal seeping through the plywood over the living room window, the "You're next" note crumpled on her dresser, beside the braid and the brick. She'd barely slept, her eyes gritty, her body buzzing with a rage she couldn't punch out. Latrice had crashed on the couch, her breathing uneven, a bottle of aspirin clutched in her hand after hours of pacing and muttering about moving again. Kiana didn't argue, didn't promise it'd be okay, because she knew it wouldn't. Senator Carver had turned her courtroom win into a target on her back, and she felt the crosshairs tightening. Morning broke grey and heavy, the suburbs quiet, a lie masking the storm she sensed brewing. She skipped school, her suspension long over but her pride too raw to face Trent's smirk or Hargrove's smug dismissal. Instead she stayed home, shadowboxing in the cramped living room, her fists slicing the air as Latrice left for her factory shift, the sedan's engine coughing down the street. The neighborhood felt off, neighbors avoiding her eyes when she stepped out to check the mail, their curtains twitching like they were waiting for something. She caught Mrs. Hensley, a pinched white woman next door, glaring from her porch, her lips pursed tight, then ducking inside when Kiana stared back. The air crackled with unease, a warning she couldn't shake, but she brushed it off, chalking it up to the bomb's aftershock. She'd beaten worse odds, hadn't she? Dusk crept in, the sky bruising purple as she microwaved a frozen burrito, the hum of the appliance the only sound in the house. She ate standing, her eyes flicking to the plywood, the taped-up scars of their last attack. The courtroom victory, Ms. Ellis's grit, the video that cleared her, it had felt like a shield. A moment to breathe. She'd walked back into Crestwood with her head high, Trent's crew silenced, the whispers shifting to her favor. Now that shield was ash, blown apart by Senator Carver's fire, and she wondered how much deeper his claws sank. She tossed. The rapper, pacing to the window, peering through a crack in the wood. The street was still too still, the kind of quiet that hides a punch. A rumble broke the silence, low and growing, like thunder rolling closer. Kiana stiffened, her ears, straining as headlights pierced the dusk, a convoy of pickup trucks roaring into the cul-de-sac, their engines snarling. Doors slammed, and figures spilled out, hooded and masked, white cloth draped over their shoulders, fists clutching bats and tire irons that glinted in the streetlights. Her heart slammed against her ribs, her breath catching as she counted 10, 12, 15 of them, a mob swarming her lawn, their boots stomping the grass where the cross had burned. Shouts erupted, slurs cutting the air. "Get out, trash!" "And this ain't your place," as they spread out, surrounding the house like wolves on a kill. Glass shattered, the kitchen window exploding inward, shards raining onto the linoleum. As a bat swung through, Kiana ducked, adrenaline flooding her veins, her body snapping into fight mode. She grabbed a baseball bat from the closet, her mom's old relic from a softball league long gone, its wood chipped but solid in her grip. The front door rattled, fists pounding, and she bolted to it, peering through the peephole. A masked face loomed, eyes wild behind the slits, a crowbar raised to pry the lock. She didn't think, just acted, yanking the door open and swinging. The bat hard, cracking it across the guy's chest. He staggered back with a grunt, tumbling into the dirt, and she stepped out, her sneakers crunching glass, her braids whipping as she faced the horde. They froze for a heartbeat, stunned by her. Charge then surged forward, a wave of hate crashing toward her. Kiana moved like a storm, dodging a tire iron that whistled past her ear, slamming her bat into a hooded knee with a sickening crunch. The guy howled, dropping, and she spun, catching another in the ribs, his bat clattering to the ground as he wheezed. 2 down, but the mob pressed in, their shouts a deafening roar. "Teach her a lesson and burn it down." She fought like she was back in Atlanta's rings, her body a blur of instinct. Every swing precise, every dodge a dance. A third lunged, his fist grazing her jaw, and she tasted blood. But she answered with a crack to his shin, sending him sprawling. The rest circled, wary now, their masks hiding cowardice she could smell. She stood over her kills, chest heaving, the bat slick with sweat in her hands, blood trickling from her lip. "Come on!" she roared, her voice raw, daring them to try again. The mob hesitated, their numbers thinning, and she thought she'd held them, driven them off with sheer will. Headlights flared, and they scattered, peeling out in their trucks, tires screeching as they fled into the night, leaving their wounded groaning in the grass. Kiana's shoulders sagged, her bat dropping to her side, the street a battlefield, of broken glass and tire tracks. She'd won, hadn't she? Protected her home, beaten back the swarm. She spat blood onto the lawn, wiping her mouth with her sleeve, her breath steadying as the adrenaline ebbed. Sirens wailed, cutting through. The quiet and 2 squad cars screeched into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing red and blue across the wreckage. Kiana straightened, expecting help, her bat resting against her leg as she faced the cops. Officer Tate stepped out first, his pit bull face twisted with a grin, his baton already in hand. "Well, look at this," he said, his voice dripping. Phantom as he surveyed the scene, the 2 downed hoods still writhing. "Assaulting civilians now, huh?" Kiana's stomach dropped, her eyes narrowing as Tate's partner, a stocky white guy with a buzz cut, circled behind her. "They attacked my house," she said, her tone hard, pointing at the shattered windows, the bat marks on the lawn. "I defended myself." Tate chuckled, a dry rasp that chilled her blood, and nodded to his partner. Sure you did, he said, stepping closer, his baton tapping his palm. But these fine folks say you started it. Protesters exercising their rights and you went wild. Kiana's jaw clenched, her mind racing as she saw the lie snap into place. The protesters groaned, one clutching his knee, the other his ribs, their masks gone, revealing white faces she didn't recognize but knew were Carver's pawns. Before she could argue, Tate grabbed her arm, wrenching it behind her, the cuffs snapping shut with a cold click. "You're under arrest," he said, his breath hot on her neck. "Assault with a deadly weapon." She twisted, glaring. Here's my home." But his partner shoved her toward the car, her bat clattering to the ground. They dragged her to the squad car, her sneakers skidding on the wet grass, the neighbors watching from their porches now, silent as ghosts. Tate's grin widened as he opened the door, slamming her inside, the vinyl seat sticking to her hoodie. She caught a glimpse of the street, her house battered. The mob's wreckage a testament to her stand, but the cuffs bit deeper, the trap closing tight. Senator Carver's voice echoed from a TV in Mrs. Hensley's window, his polished face on. The news: "This thug is terrorizing our community, a clear danger to our values." Kiana's blood boiled, her fists flexing against the steel, the broadcast twisting her fight into a smear. She'd beaten them off, held her ground, but they'd flipped it, made her the monster. The car rolled out, the suburbs' lights blurring past, Tate's radio crackling with smug chatter as they headed downtown. Kiana leaned her head against the window, her jaw tight, her mind spinning. She'd thought she'd won, sent the mob running with their tails tucked, but this arrest was their counterblow, a knife sharper than any bat. Carver wasn't just after her now. He was after her soul, her home, her everything, and Tate was his dog on the leash. The precinct loomed ahead, its grey bulk a promise of more hell, and she braced herself, her lips curling into a snarl. They thought they'd caged her this time, turned her victory into chains, but she'd clawed out before. She'd do it again, and they'd pay double for this. Kiana Jackson slumped in the back of the squad car. Her wrists chafed raw from Officer Tate's cuffs, the precinct's grey silhouette looming closer as the night swallowed Crestwood's pristine streets. Her jaw throbbed from the mob's glancing. Blood drying on her lip. But her mind was sharper than ever, replaying the hooded swarm, her bat-cracking bones, Tate's smug grin twisting her victory into chains. The "you're next" note burned in her memory. Senator Carver's voice droning from that TV, branding her a thug while his goons trashed her home. She'd fought them off, sent them running, but this arrest was a gut punch, proof his power stretched beyond fists and fire. Latrice would be home soon, finding the house battered, her daughter gone again, and Kiana's stomach knotted at the thought. She'd promised to keep it together, but they wouldn't let her. Morning broke, and she was out on bail again, Latrice's factory paycheck stretched thin to spring her from the cell where Tate had left her pacing. She stepped into the dawn, her hoodie torn at the sleeve, her braids tangled from the fight, but her eyes burned with a fire that hadn't dimmed. Back home, the living room was a war zone, glass swept into piles, the bat lying where she'd dropped it, a silent witness to her stand. Latrice sank onto the couch, her hands shaking as she clutched a mug. "We can't stay here, Kai," her voice cracking, but Kiana didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the plywood window, the world outside plotting her next fall. She'd beaten. The mob walked out of cuffs twice now, but Carver's shadow loomed larger, a beast she couldn't punch. School wasn't an option, not with Tate's lies and Carver's news spin painting her as a menace, so she holed up, plotting her next move. Malik and Tasha showed up that afternoon, slipping through the back door like scouts in enemy territory, their faces tight with worry and something fiercer. Malik, tall and lean, dropped a burner phone on the table, his voice low. "People saw the mob, Key, they're pissed." Tasha, her curls bouncing as she paced, nodded. "Kids at school won't shut up about it. We've got your back." Kiana eyed them, her trust a thin thread after Tate, the cross, the bomb, but their anger matched hers, a spark she could use. "They've got video," she said, pulling out the janitor's clip from the art room, the one that cleared her last time. "Let's make it loud," Malik grinned, cracking his knuckles. "I know a guy who'll blast it online." Tasha snatched the phone, her fingers flying as she texted, "We'll tag every platform, call out Carver's bullshit." Kiana nodded, her lips curling, a plan forming like a fist closing. They uploaded the video that night, the grainy footage of Trent's scissors, her braid falling, her fight back, paired with shaky clips from neighbors' phones, showing the mob's trucks, the bats, her swinging. Malik's contact worked fast, and by morning it was everywhere. Hashtags like "Our Justice for Kiana" and "Crestwood Cover-Up" trending locally, comments piling up, "She's a hero, Carver's a crook." Protests sparked outside Crestwood High, kids chanting her name, signs scrawled with "No more lies." Malik and Tasha at the front, fists raised. Kiana watched from the house, peering through the plywood crack, her chest swelling as the crowd grew, their voices a roar she hadn't expected. Trent's crew got suspended that day. Hargrove's office swarmed by parents demanding answers, the school board scrambling to investigate. She smirked, leaning against the wall, the burner, buzzing with updates from Malik. "They're crumbling, Kai." Tasha texted, "We've got 'em on the ropes." She'd turned the tide, hadn't she? Flipped Carver's smear into a weapon, rallied a town that had shunned her. The mob's attack, Tate's cuffs, they'd backfired. Her fight now a fire, spreading beyond her control. She flexed her hands, the tape from last night still clinging to her knuckles, a rare calm settling in. Maybe this was how you win here, not just with fists, but with truth. That evening the protests hit the news, shaky footage of kids blocking Crestwood's gates, Malik's voice booming through a megaphone. "She defended her home." Kiana sat with Latrice, the TV flickering, her mum's eyes wide with something like hope. "They're listening," Latrice whispered, her hand squeezing Kiana's, and for a moment it felt real, a victory carved from chaos. She stepped outside, the air cool, the street quiet for once, no trucks, no sirens, just the hum of a suburb forced to see her. She'd broken their silence, hadn't she? Made them pay with their own game. She turned back inside, ready to crash, when Tasha knocked, her face pale, her curls damp with sweat as she slipped in, shutting the door fast. "Kai, we need to talk," Tasha said, her voice low, her eyes darting like she'd seen a ghost. Kiana frowned, leaning against the counter. "What's up?" Tasha hesitated, her hands twisting, then blurted, "I messed up. Carver's people. They paid me." Kiana's blood ran cold, her body tensing as Tasha's words sank in. "Paid you for what?" she asked, her tone sharp, a blade unsheathed. Tasha swallowed, tears glinting. "To plant drugs in your bag. Last week before the mob, I didn't think they'd go this far." Kiana's fists clenched, her breath hitching as the betrayal hit, a punch harder than any bat. "You sold me." "Hout," she growled, stepping closer, her shadow swallowing Tasha's trembling frame. "I didn't mean it," Tasha sobbed. "They threatened my brother, said they'd hurt him." Before Kiana could swing, sirens screamed, lights flashing. Through the plywood as cop cars screeched into the driveway, doors slamming, boots pounding. Tate burst in, warrant in hand, his grin a slash of triumph. "Search order, Jackson, step back." Kiana froze, Tasha bolting to the corner as cops swarmed, flipping cushions, ripping drawers, their radios crackling with glee. Tate beelined for her backpack, yanking it open, and pulled out a baggie of white powder, holding it up like a prize. "Well, well," he said, "looks like we've got a dealer." Kiana's eyes snapped to Tasha, who shrank, sobbing, "I'm sorry." But the damage was done. The room spun, Latrice rushing in, shouting, "That's not hers." But Tate ignored her, cuffing Kiana's wrists tighter this time, metal biting flesh. They dragged her outside, the street alive with flashing lights, neighbors gawking as news vans rolled up, cameras catching her cuffed. The baggie waved like a flag. "Live from Crestwood," a reporter chirped. "Local teen arrested in drug bust, linked to recent violence." Kiana's heart pounded, her victory crumbling as Tate shoved her into the car, his partner smirking. "Should have stayed quiet." She twisted, glaring through the window. The crowd from the protests nowhere, Malik's face missing. Tasha's betrayal a knife in her gut. The sedan peeled out, the precinct ahead, and she saw it now. Carver's plan, Tasha's dupe, the mob. A distraction to set this up. She'd rallied a movement, thought she'd won, but they'd flipped it, turned her fire into a noose, The cell loomed again, colder this time, the bars slamming shut as Tate lingered, his grin a promise of more. "Pain. So you're done, Jackson," he said, twirling his baton. "Carver's got the town eating out of his hand now." Kiana sank onto the bench, her hands flexing against the cuffs, her mind racing. She'd built something, hadn't she? A spark of justice, a roar of support, only to watch it choke on lies. Tasha's tears, the drugs, the cameras, it was a masterpiece of ruin, Carver's checkmate to her king. Latrice would fight, Miss Ellis too, but this was deeper, dirtier, a hole she might not climb out of. Her lips curled, a snarl forming as she stared at the bars. They thought they'd buried her this time, but she'd risen before. She'd rise again and they'd choke on their own trap. Did Tasha's betrayal cut deeper than the mob's bats? Comment number 1 if you think Kiana's trust was her real mistake. Hit like if you're gutted by this twist. And subscribe because the next chapter's going to test her limits like never before. Can Kiana break free from this cell, or is Carver's cage unbreakable? Kiana Jackson sat shackled in a dented metal chair, the detention center's intake room a grey tomb of flickering lights and peeling paint. Her wrists burned under the cuffs, her hoodie confiscated, leaving her in a thin orange jumpsuit that hung loose on her frame. The air stank of mildew and despair, the hum of a dying fluorescent bulb overhead her only company as she waited for trial, Tasha's betrayal still a fresh wound in her gut. She'd rallied a movement, turned crestwards. Whispers into roars, only to have it all collapse under planted drugs and Senator Carver's lies. Latrice had screamed when they dragged her away, Ms. Ellis promising to fight. But this place felt like a grave, a deeper hole than juvie, carved just for her. She flexed her hands, the cuffs clinking, her mind replaying Tate's grin, the baggie waving, the cameras flashing. She'd risen before, but this time the weight pressed harder. The door clanged open, and Officer Tate swaggered in, his pitbull face split by a smirk, his baton swinging like a pendulum. "Welcome back, Princess," he said, his voice a slow drip of venom circling her chair like a vulture. "Thought you'd slip out again, huh? Not this time." Kiana didn't flinch, her eyes locked on his, a silent dare he couldn't read. She'd beaten his thug in juvie, walked out of his cuffs, and he'd burned her yard for it. Now, with Carver's drug frame up, he had her pinned, and his glee oozed from every pore. "You're a real pain," he said, leaning close, his breath sour with coffee and spite. "But I've got ways to fix that." She stayed still, her silence a blade, knowing he thrived on her snapping. Not yet, she thought. Not until she could hit where it hurt. Days bled into a blur of cold meals and colder stares, the detention center a maze of locked doors and hollow-eyed girls who kept their distance. Kiana paced her cell, a 6-foot box, with a bunk and a toilet, her sneakers scuffing the concrete as she shadowboxed the walls, her fists whispering through the air. She'd caught Tate's routine, his taunts through the bars. "You people never learn," his accidental shoves when he marched her to the yard. She logged every move, every smirk, waiting for a crack. On the 5th day, she found it. A younger guard, Officer Perry, a black man with tired eyes and a limp who didn't grin when he brought her tray. "Rough spot, huh?" he said, his voice soft, sliding the food through the slot. Kiana nodded, testing him. "Tate's a problem." Perry's jaw tightened, a flicker of something real, and she pressed, "He's dirty, you know it." Perry hesitated, glancing down the hall, then muttered, "I've seen him push girls too far. Ain't right." Kiana leaned closer, her voice, "Slosik, he locked me with a fighter in juvie, tried to break me. He's doing worse here." Perry's eyes narrowed, his hand pausing on the slot, and she spilled it, the shoves, the taunts, the way Tate lingered too long outside her cell. "He's Carver's dog," she said, "and I've got proof coming." Perry didn't answer, just nodded once, limping off, but she saw the seed take root. That night, she heard him arguing with Tate in the hall, voices sharp, Perry's rising. "You can't keep doing this, man," Tate barked back, "mind your business." But the crack widened and Kiana grinned, her first real win since the cuffs. A week later, Ms. Ellis stormed in, her coat still singed from the bomb, her glasses fixed with tape, a fire in her step as she met Kiana in the visitor room. "We've got him," she said, slapping a file on the table. her voice buzzing with triumph. Perry filed a report, said Tate's been roughing up girls, targeting you special. Got a witness too, another detainee. Kiana's pulse quickened, her eyes scanning the pages, Perry's words in black ink. Excessive force, racial slurs, possible setup. Ms. Ellis leaned in. Coupled with the mob attack, it's enough to suspend him. Trials in 2 days, and this'll help. Kiana's lips curled, a snarl of victory as she pictured Tate's badge ripped off, his grin wiped clean. He's done, she said, and Ms. Ellis nodded. For now. The hearing was quick. A cramped room with a bored judge and Tate sweating in his uniform, his lawyer floundering as Perry testified, calm and steady. He shoved her into a wall, called her trash, locked her with a known fighter. The detainee, a skinny girl with braids, backed it up, her voice shaky but firm. He laughed when she got hit. Kiana sat silent, her orange jumpsuit stark against the wood bench, her eyes boring into Tate as the judge ruled, "Suspended pending investigation." Tate stormed out, his baton slapping his thigh, his glare promising hell. But Kiana stood, tore her cuffs off for the moment, a weight lifting. She'd clawed back power, hadn't she? Turned his game against him, cracked his armor. She walked back to her cell, head high, the other girls nodding, a ripple of respect she hadn't felt since Crestwood. That night, she lay on her bunk, the concrete cool against her back, her mind replaying Perry's stand, Tate's fall, a rare calm settling in. She'd beaten him, stripped his badge, sent a message. Maybe this was the shift, the tide turning, back her way. She closed her eyes, drifting toward sleep, when a clang jolted her up, the cell block erupting in shouts, feet pounding, metal screeching. Her door flew open, no guard in sight, and girls spilled into the hall, fists swinging, trays crashing, a riot bursting like a dam breaking. Kiana leapt up, her instincts kicking in, dodging a wild punch as a heavy-set girl charged, her eyes crazed. She sidestepped, slamming her into the wall, but more came, a tide of orange jumpsuits, some screaming her name, Jackson's fault. She fought through, her fists a blur, cracking a jaw, twisting an arm, her body a machine honed in Atlanta's pits. A chair sailed past, smashing a light, sparks raining as she ducked, her breath ragged. She caught a glimpse of Perry, cornered by 3 girls, his limp slowing him, and she bolted toward him, shoving one off, her elbow cracking another's nose. "Get back!" she yelled, pulling him clear, but he vanished in the chaos. The hall a war zone of blood and broken glass. A fist caught her ribs, pain flaring, and she spun, dropping the attacker with a knee to the gut. But the mob pressed. Too many, too fast. Boots thundered, guards storming in, batons swinging, and Kiana took a hit to the shoulder, staggering as they pinned her, cuffs snapping tight, her face pressed to the floor. They dragged her to solitary, a pitch-black box, her jumpsuit torn, blood trickling from her lip, her ribs screaming with every breath. The door slammed and a guard barked, "Riot's on you, Jackson," his voice muffled through the steel. She sank against the wall, her hands shaking, the dark swallowing her as a slot opened, a note sliding through, scrawled in jagged ink. "This is your fault." Her stomach dropped, the pieces clicking. Tate's grudge, Carver's reach, the girls paid to turn on her. She'd beaten Tate, thought she'd won, but this riot was their answer, a savage counterblow that left her bruised and caged. Perry was gone, her allies scattered, and she was alone, the air thick with defeat. She clutched the note, her fingers trembling, her snarl fading into a grimace as pain pulsed through her. The victory over Tate had felt solid, a crack in their wall, but this was a landslide, burying her deeper than the drugs, the mob, the bomb. Carver's machine didn't just fight back. It crushed, and she'd underestimated its teeth. She leaned her head back, the concrete cold, her breath shallow as she traced the cuff's edges, a fighter sizing up a new ring. They thought they'd broken her, locked her in this hole to rot, but she'd survived worse. She'd find a way out, and when she did, they'd feel every blow she'd taken doubled back on their skulls. Kiana Jackson emerged from solitary, her orange jumpsuit clinging to her bruised frame, the detention center's dank air still heavy in her lungs. Her ribs ached from the riot's blows, her lip scabbed over, but her eyes burned with a fire. That hadn't flickered, even after 3 days in that black box. The note, "This is your fault," lay crumpled in her pocket, a taunt from Senator Carver's machine. But she'd survived their latest trap, her body battered, but her will intact. Miss Ellis had pulled strings to get her out, her voice sharp through the bars. "Trial's tomorrow, Kai, we're ready." Kiana nodded, her sneakers scuffing the concrete as guards marched her back to her cell, their glares cold but wary, like they knew she wouldn't break. She'd beaten Tate, faced the riot, and now she'd face the courtroom, a fighter stepping into the ring one last time. Morning came fast, the sky a dull grey as they cuffed her again, loading her into a van that rattled through Crestwood's pristine streets toward the courthouse 30 miles away. Her trial loomed, the drug charge a noose Carver had tightened with Tasha's betrayal, the mob's attack, the riot's chaos, all twisted into a narrative of her guilt. Latrice sat in the front row, her hands clasped tight, her eyes red, but steady, while Miss Ellis paced beside her, her singed coat swapped for a crisp blazer, her glasses still taped but her fire undimmed. The courtroom buzzed, a packed gallery of reporters, neighbors, kids from school, their whispers a hum of anticipation. As Kiana took her seat, her jumpsuit swapped for a borrowed shirt and slacks, her braids pulled back, scars on display. Trent Carver slouched across the aisle, his nose healed but his glare venomous. His dad, Senator Carver, looming behind him, his suit pristine, his face a mask of calm fury. The judge, a stern white man with a buzz cut and a gavel that gleamed, called order, his voice a low growl as the prosecutor stood, a slick guy with a cheap tie and a smug grin. "Kiana Jackson's a danger," he said, pacing, waving the baggie of white powder like a flag, a violent drug dealer who attacked. Peaceful protesters incited a riot, assaulted her peers. Kiana's jaw clenched, her fists curling under the table, the lies piling up like bricks she couldn't punch through. Miss Ellis rose, her voice cutting sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a frame-up, and we've got proof." The judge nodded and she launched in, her words a blade slicing through the prosecutor's story. "Senator Carver's tied to a hate group, and we've got the dirt to show it." She dropped a bombshell, a stack of papers slamming onto the table, her eyes glinting as she detailed Carver's links, bank records tying him to the mob's trucks, emails hinting at payoffs to Tate, a blurry photo of him at a hooded rally years back. Gasps rippled through the gallery, reporters scribbling, Trent shifting in his seat as his dad's mask cracked, his lips thinning. "This is about revenge," Miss Ellis said, pointing at Kiana, a girl who dared fight back. She played the janitor's video again, Trent's scissors snipping her braid, then a neighbor's clip of the mob, bats swinging, Kiana defending her home. The prosecutor sputtered, "That's irrelevant." But the judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, the room hushing as Miss Ellis dropped the final blow, a leaked audio from Trent's phone. His voice slurring at a party, "Yeah, I cut her hair, so what? Dad'll fix it." The courtroom erupted, shouts echoing, the judge banging his gavel as Senator Carver's face went pale, his hands gripping the bench. Kiana sat still, her breath steady, her scars a map of every fight she'd won to get here. The prosecutor tried to rally, "She's still a drug dealer." But Ms. Ellis countered, "Planted by a paid informant, Tasha Reed, coerced by Carver's threats." Tasha wasn't there, her absence a ghost, but the audio and papers painted the truth, a web of corruption the judge couldn't ignore. He called a recess, the room buzzing as Kiana met Latrice's eyes, her mom's nod a lifeline, Miss Ellis whispering, "We've got this, Kai." Hours later, the verdict came, the judge's voice flat but final. "Charges dismissed. Evidence of tampering and misconduct is overwhelming." Kiana exhaled, her shoulders loosening as Latrice sobbed, rushing to hug her, Miss Ellis grinning wide. "Told you, kid." The gallery split, some cheering, others hissing. Trent storming out, his dad's glare a promise of more as he swept past reporters shouting questions. Kiana stood, her borrowed shirt wrinkled, her braids swaying, the cuffs finally off. A weight, lifting she hadn't felt since Crestwood's halls. She'd won, hadn't she? Cleared her name, exposed Carver's rot, walked out free. She stepped into the hall, sunlight streaming through high windows, her sneakers echoing as she breathed. Deep, the air tasting like victory. Outside, the courthouse steps swarmed with cameras, Kids from school, Malik at the front, his fist raised. "Kiana," he shouted, a small crowd chanting her name, signs scrawled with "Justice Now." She paused, lifting her own fist, a grin breaking through her scars, the first real smile since the braid fell. Miss Ellis flanked her, Latrice beside her, their steps steady as they faced the press, a wall of mics and flashing lights. "She's innocent," Miss Ellis said, her voice firm, "and we're not done fighting." Kiana nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd, soaking in the roar, the support she'd ignited with her fists and her truth. She'd beaten them, turned their game inside out, hadn't she? The sun warmed her face, the weight of months lifting, a moment to savor. She turned to head down the steps, her mum's arm linked with hers, when a crack split the air, sharp and sudden, a gunshot echoing off the stone. Pain seared her shoulder, a hot graze tearing through her shirt, and she stumbled, blood blooming red as Latrice screamed, "Kiana!" The crowd scattered, cameras dropping, Malik diving for cover as Miss Ellis yanked them behind a pillar, her voice barking, "Get down!" Kiana clutched her arm, her breath ragged, her eyes darting to the rooftops, a glint of metal vanishing into the dusk. Blood dripped through her fingers, the pain of fire, but she stayed upright, her snarl returning as chaos reigned. "Sniper!" Ms. Ellis hissed, her glasses slipping. "Carver's last play." Cops swarmed late as always, their radios crackling as they cordoned the steps, shouting, "Shooter's gone!" Kiana leaned against the pillar, her vision swimming, Latrice sobbing beside her. "You're okay, baby, you're okay." Paramedics rushed in, their hands quick as they pressed gauze to her shoulder, the wound shallow but bleeding hard, a graze that could have been her skull. She waved them off, her voice hoarse. "I'm fine," but her eyes burned, scanning the crowd for Carver, Trent, anyone tied to this hit. He wasn't there, his absence a taunt, but she knew his hand, his desperation to silence her after the trial's blow. She'd won in court, exposed his filth, thought she'd broken his grip, but this bullet was his answer, a whisper of death she'd barely dodged. They hustled her to an ambulance, Latrice clinging to her, Miss Ellis barking at. "Cops, find him!" Kiana sat on the gurney, her shoulder throbbing, blood soaking the gauze, but her mind was clear, a fighter sizing up the next round. The crowd watched, some filming, others shouting her name, a mix of fear and awe she could feel through the chaos. She'd walked out free, fist raised, only to take a hit that proved Carver wouldn't quit. The paramedic pressed harder. "You're lucky," he said, but she didn't feel it, not with blood on her hands again, not with Carver's shadow stretching longer. She'd beaten the charges, cracked his armor, but this sniper was a claw, slashing back, a war she couldn't end with a gavel. The ambulance doors shut, the siren wailing as it rolled out, Crestwood's lights blurring past. Kiana leaned back, her breath steadying, her snarl deepening as pain pulsed through her. She'd thought acquittal was the finish line, a clean break from their chains, but this bullet tore that lie apart. Carver wasn't done, his machine too, vast, too vicious to stop at a courtroom loss. She flexed her good hand, the other limp under bandages, her eyes narrowing at the ceiling. They'd tried to kill her, hadn't they? Missed by inches, but the message landed. No win was final, no freedom safe. She'd heal, fight again, and when she did, they'd feel every scar she carried carved back into their bones. Kiana Jackson lay in a hospital bed, the antiseptic sting of the room sharp in her nose, her shoulder bandaged tight where the sniper's bullet had grazed her 2 days ago. The white walls glared under fluorescent lights, monitors beeping a steady rhythm as pain pulsed through her arm, a dull fire she gritted her teeth against. Latrice slumped in a chair beside her, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights, her hands clutching a crumpled tissue, while Ms. Ellis paced near the door, her singed coat swapped for a sweater, her voice low on a phone call with a cop who'd promised nothing about the shooter. Kiana stared at the ceiling, her good hand flexing, the trial's acquittal a hollow echo against the blood on her shirt, Carver's last shot still ringing in her ears. She'd walked out free, only to dodge death, and the war wasn't over. The doctor came, a wiry black woman with a clipboard, her tone brisk as she checked the wound. "You're healing fast, no infection. Out tomorrow if you rest." Kiana nodded, her jaw tight. Rest a luxury she couldn't afford with Carver's machine still grinding. Latrice squeezed her hand. "We'll move, Kai, start over." her voice trembling. But Kiana shook her head, her snarl returning. "Not running. Not yet." Miss Ellis hung up, her eyes sharp. "No leads on the sniper, but the trial's fallouts. Hitting Carver hard. We've got leverage." Kiana sat up, wincing, her mind racing. "Then we use it." She'd heal, train, hit back, because Carver wouldn't stop until she did. Discharged the next day, she limped home in borrowed sweats, her shoulder stiff but her fists itching. The hospital's sterile calm swapped for Crestwood's tense quiet. The house stood battered, windows patched, the lawn scarred from the cross and mob, but she didn't linger inside. She set up in the garage, dragging the punching bag from her room, its chains rattling as she hung it from a beam. Latrice watched. From the doorway, worry creasing her face. "You need time, Kai." But Kiana taped her hands, her good arm swinging. "Time's what they want me to waste." Each punch landed harder, sweat beading, her shoulders screaming but her rhythm steady. A fighter rebuilding what they'd tried to break. She'd dodged a bullet, one in court, and now she'd bury them. Ms. Ellis dug deeper, her contacts sniffing out Carver's cracks, while Kiana trained, her days a blur of punches and painkillers, her nights haunted by the sniper's glint. Week later, Ellis burst in, a laptop under her arm. "Got it," her voice electric as she flipped it open. "Carver's campaign's tanking. That audio from Trent, the hate group ties, it's online everywhere." Kiana leaned in, the screen glowing with headlines. "Senator faces corruption probe. Carver linked to extremists. Comments raging. Resign now." She grinned, her shoulder throbbing. "He's done." Ellis nodded. "Not yet. But close. We've got one more push." Kiana knew it, a knockout blow to finish him, and she'd deliver it herself. They leaked more, Kiana feeding Ellis scraps from memory, Tate's taunts, the mob's trucks, connecting dots to a blogger named Reese, a scrappy white guy with a following who jumped on her story after the trial. Reese ran with it, posting a thread. Carver's hate cell funded the sniper, with blurry pics of hooded figures, bank trails Ellis had unearthed, a voice clip of Trent bragging, "Dad's got people for that." The internet erupted, protests, flaring outside Carver's office 30 miles away, kids from Crestwood joining, Malik's voice booming through clips. "Kiana's proof he's rotten." She watched from the garage, the burner phone buzzing with updates, her fists clenching the tape. She'd turned their war into hers, hadn't she? Cracked his empire with every swing. 2 days later, it broke wide, Carver's arrest flashing. On the news, Senator charged with conspiracy assault. His mugshot a pale smear, his suit rumpled as cuffs snapped on. Kiana stood in the living room, Latrice beside her, the TV flickering. Federal probe confirms ties to hate groups, corruption in Crestwood. Trent's expulsion followed, the school board caving under pressure, his name erased from the roster, his crew shunned, whispers of Kiana's revenge echoing through the halls. She exhaled, her shoulder loosening, the weight of months lifting as Latrice hugged her. "You did it, baby." Ms. Ellis called, "He's locked up, Kai, you're clear." Kiana nodded, her snarl softening, a victory carved from blood and grit. She'd won, hadn't she? Toppled the king, broken his pawns, reclaimed her ground. She stepped outside, the dusk cool, the suburbs quiet, real for once. No trucks, no sirens, just crickets and a breeze rustling the scarred lawn. She flexed her good hand, the other still tender, her braids swaying as she breathed deep, the air tasting like freedom. Carver was gone, his machine stalled, Trent a ghost, and she'd done it, turned their hate into rubble. She'd train more tomorrow, rebuild stronger, but tonight she'd rest, a fighter who'd earned it. Latrice cooked dinner, the first real meal in weeks, and Kiana sat, the clink of plates a rare piece, her mind drifting to the ring, the streets, a future she could shape. She'd beaten them all, hadn't she? The thought lingered, warm and solid as she ate. A knock jolted her, soft but sharp, and she stood, her shoulder twinging as she crossed to the door. A package sat on the stoop, small and brown, no label, no sender, just her name scrawled in black ink. She frowned, picking it up, the weight odd, heavier than it looked, and carried it inside, Latrice peering over. "What's that?" Kiana sliced it open with a kitchen knife, her gut twisting as the flaps fell back. revealing her old braid, the one Trent cut, its dark strands coiled tight, soaked in blood that dripped onto the table, red and wet. A note slipped out, jagged, script screaming, "From the family," and her breath caught, her hands trembling as she dropped the knife, the blade clattering. Latrice gasped, stumbling back. "Kai, what's this?" But Kiana didn't answer. Her eyes locked on the braid, the blood pooling, her mind racing. Carver was locked up, Trent gone, but this was new, a claw reaching from the shadows he'd left behind. She bolted outside, the night swallowing her as she scanned the street, headlights flashing in the distance, too far to chase. Back inside, the phone rang, Ms. Ellis's voice tight. "Kai, turn on the news." She did, the screen flaring with a breaking report. Hate cell claims responsibility for threats in Crestwood, vows revenge for Carver's arrest. A grainy clip showing masked figures spray painting her house. KJ dies, the red letters, stark against the siding she hadn't seen today. Her stomach dropped, her victory shattering as Latrice clutched her arm. "We're not safe," her voice breaking while Kiana stood frozen, the braid's blood staining her fingers, the spray paint a fresh wound on her home. She'd toppled Carver, thought she'd won, but this cell was his legacy, a hydra sprouting new heads deadlier than before. She'd trained, leaked, fought, broken his empire, only to birth this monster, a collective fueled by his fall, their hate sharper, their reach unknown. The news droned, police investigating, but she knew they'd do nothing, just like the cross, the bomb, the sniper. She stepped to the window, the plywood rattling, her good fist clenching, her snarl returning as headlights flickered again, closer now. She grabbed the bat from the living room, its wood chipped but steady, her shoulder protesting as she gripped it, the bloodied braid a taunt on the table. Latrice sobbed, "Kai, we need to go," but Kiana shook her head, her voice low. "They don't get to chase me out." She'd beaten Carver, thought it was over, but this was war rebooted. A new enemy rising from his ashes, their threats a promise she couldn't ignore. She'd won a battle, toppled a titan only to face a legion, their hate a tide she'd have to swim through. The bat rested against her leg, her eyes scanning the dark, her breath steadying as she braced for the next blow. They'd come for her, hadn't they? She'd be ready, and they'd learn what Carver hadn't. She didn't break, she broke them. Kiana Jackson gripped the chipped baseball bat in her good hand, her shoulder throbbing under the bandage, as she stood in the living room, the blood-soaked braid still dripping on the table, the spray paint's KJ dies glowing red through the plywood window in the dawn light. Latrice hovered near the couch, her hands wringing a dish towel, her voice trembling. "Kai, we can't stay here." But Kiana's eyes stayed fixed on the street, headlights long gone, the hate cells, threat a live wire in her veins. She'd toppled Senator Carver, broken Trent, thought she'd won, only to face this new beast, a hydra spawned from his ruin, its claws sharper, its hate deeper. She'd trained for this, hadn't she? Her breath steadied, her snarl hardening, as she turned to her mom. "I'm ending it, tonight." Latrice's protest died in her throat, her daughter's resolve a wall she couldn't breach. She called Malik, his voice crackling through the burner phone. "Kai, you okay?" She didn't. Waste words. "They hit my house, I need you." He didn't hesitate. "I'm in. Tasha's out, but I've got others." Kiana nodded, her mind racing. "Meet me at the old mill midnight. Bring who you trust." She'd rallied them before, turned whispers into roars, and now she'd rally them again. Not for protests, but for war. Ms. Ellis rang next, her tone sharp. "I've got a lead, Kai. Cells meeting at the mill, abandoned spot off Route 12. Be careful." Kiana grinned, a fighter stepping into the ring. "Careful's not my style." She hung up, taping her hands, the bat resting against her leg, her shoulder stiff but her will iron. They'd come for her, and she'd meet them head-on. Midnight loomed, the air cool and thick as Kiana slipped out, her hoodie dark, her braids tucked under a cap, the bat slung over her good shoulder. Latrice watched from the door, her eyes wet. "Come back, Kai," a plea Kiana didn't answer, her sneakers silent on the wet grass as she headed for the mill 10 miles out. The suburb slept, its perfect lawns a lie hiding the hate festering in its shadows, but she felt alive, her pulse a drumbeat, every step a promise to finish this. Malik met her at the mill's rusted gates, a hulking shell of brick and steel swallowed by weeds. His tall frame flanked by three others, kids from Crestwood's edges, their faces hard, fists ready. "They're inside," he whispered, nodding, at the flickering lights through broken windows. Maybe 12 hooded up. Kiana scanned the scene, her eyes narrowing, the bat a familiar weight as she mapped the ambush. "We hit fast, scatter them, no mercy." Malik nodded, his grin tight. Like the protests, but meaner. She led them in, slipping through a side door, the mill's guts a maze of rotting beams and oil stains, the air thick with dust and menace. Voices echoed low and rough. "She's done! Carver's avenged!" And Kiana's blood boiled, her grip tightening as she crept closer. The hooded figures gathered around a table, bats and chains glinting in the dim glow. She counted 10, not 12, their masks white, their laughter a taunt she'd silence. She'd beaten worse odds, hadn't she? Her snarl curled, her body coiling as she signaled Malik. "Now." They burst in, a storm of fists and wood. Kiana, swinging first, her bat cracking a hooded skull with a wet thud, the guy dropping like a sack. Malik charged, his long arms slamming a chain wielder into a wall, the metal clattering as the others scattered, shouts ripping the air. "It's her!" She moved like a blade, dodging a wild swing, her good arm driving the bat into a gut, then up to a jaw, bones snapping under her fury. The three kids flanked her, fists flying, one taking a hit but dropping his foe with a knee to the groin, blood spraying as the cells scrambled, their bravado crumbling. Kiana spun, her shoulders screaming, cracking another across the back, his spine arching as he fell, the table overturning, chains skidding across the concrete. 5 down, 5 to go, the mill a chaos of grunts and crashes, Malik pinning one, his elbow smashing a nose, while Kiana faced a big guy, his bat raised, his mask slipping to reveal a scarred white face, eyes wild with hate. "For Carver!" he roared, swinging hard, but she ducked, her bat slamming his knee, a crack echoing as he buckled, her follow-up shattering his arm, his scream a howl she savored. The last 4 circled, wary now, their breaths ragged, and she stood tall, her bat dripping blood, her voice a growl. "Who's next?" They broke, 2 bolting for the door, the others lunging, but Malik's crew cut them off, fists and boots ending it fast, bodies littering the floor, the mill silent but for groans. Kiana stood over the wreckage, her chest heaving, her shoulder a fire she ignored, the bat slick in her grip as she scanned the fallen, their masks torn, their hate beaten into the dust. She'd done it, hadn't she? Smashed the cell, avenged. The braid, the bomb, the bullet, her home safe now. Malik stepped beside her, wiping blood from his lip. "We got him, Ki." His voice steady, a nod of triumph. The 3 kids panted, one nursing a bruised jaw, but their eyes glinted with pride. A crew forged in this fight. She dropped the bat, its clatter echoing, her good hand flexing, the pain a badge of her win. "Let's go," she said, turning. For the door the night hers again, or so she thought. Malik lingered, his shadow stretching as she stepped into the mill's yard, the air cool against her sweat-soaked skin, her cap slipping as she pulled it off, her braids spilling free. She didn't hear him move, didn't see the glint until cold steel pressed against her back, a knife's edge biting through her hoodie, his voice low and wrong. "Stop, Kai." She froze, her breath catching, her mind reeling as she turned. Slow, his face a mask of guilt and steel, the knife steady in his grip. "I'm sorry." Her heart slammed, her snarl fading into shock. "What the hell, Malik?" He swallowed, his eyes darting. "They paid me after the protests. Said they'd kill my sister if I didn't feed 'em info. Set this up." The world tilted, her victory ash in her mouth as his words sank in. A betrayal sharper than Tasha's, deeper than Tate's cuffs. "You sold me," she whispered, her voice breaking, her good fist clenching as the 3 kids backed off, confusion twisting their faces. Malik's hand shook, the knife wavering. "I didn't want this, Kai, but they've got more, bigger." "Then Carver." She lunged, her shoulder screaming, grabbing his wrist and twisting, the knife spinning free as she drove her elbow into his jaw, a crack splitting the night. He staggered, blood streaming, and she slammed him down, her knee on his chest, her snarl a roar. "You were my brother," he gasped, tears mixing with blood. "They'll come anyway, Kai. I just bought time." She stood, her breath ragged, the knife glinting in the dirt as sirens wailed, distant but closing. The mill's shadows alive with her ruin. The three kids bolted, their loyalty gone, and she stepped back. Malik crumpled at her feet. Her victory flipped into a trap, his betrayal the final blow. She'd smashed the cell, thought she'd ended it, but he'd handed her to a bigger beast, a tide she couldn't see. Cops swarmed, lights flashing, their shouts a blur as she dropped the bat, her hands raising slow, her eyes locked on Malik's broken form, a friend turned foe she'd never forgive. They cuffed her, rough but quick, her shoulder a blaze of pain as they dragged her to a car, the mill fading behind her. Bodies still strewn inside. She didn't resist, her fight drained. The precinct ahead, a familiar hell she'd face again. Latrice would break, Miss Ellis would rage, but this was hers to carry, a win turned to dust by the one she'd trusted most. The car rolled. Atlanta's, lights flickering 30 miles south, and she vanished into them, her braids swaying, her snarl gone, replaced by a cold calm. She wasn't a victim, wasn't a hero, just a ghost now, slipping into the shadows she knew best, the city swallowing her whole. Back home, a new braid lay on her dresser, one she'd woven herself, dark and tight, a piece reclaimed from the bloodied wreck they'd sent. She'd heal, regroup, wait, her eyes sharp in the dark as the precinct loomed, her silence a promise. They'd come for her again, wouldn't they? She'd be ready, a fighter forged anew, and when they did, she'd carve her name into their bones, a reckoning they'd never outrun. For now she faded, a shadow with a pulse. The war paused, but never done. Kiana Jackson's journey teaches us resilience isn't just surviving blows, but standing taller after each one. She faced relentless racist attacks, starting with Trent Carver cutting her braid, escalating to mob violence, a sniper's bullet, and betrayal from those she trusted. Yet she never broke. Her story shows that strength lies in refusing to bow, even when the system stacks the deck against you. Kiana turned every assault into a weapon, exposing Senator Carver's corruption and rallying a community, proving that one voice can shatter silence. But her victories came at a cost, each win birthing a fiercer foe, from Carver's hate cell to Malik's knife, revealing a hard truth. Fighting injustice often means facing an endless war where trust can turn to ash in an instant. The tale also underscores the power of persistence over privilege. Carver's wealth and influence couldn't bury Kiana's grit. Her fists and cunning leveled a playing field rigged by racist power. Yet it warns of betrayal's sting. Malik's turn reminds us that allies can falter under pressure, leaving scars deeper than any physical wound. Kiana's final fade into Atlanta's shadows isn't defeat, but a regrouping, a lesson in knowing when to fight and when to vanish, preserving strength for the next battle. Her story urges us to question who we trust, how we resist, and what we're willing to lose for justice. So what's your takeaway? How far would you go to stand against hate when it hits home? Drop a comment with your thoughts, hit like if Kiana's fire inspires you. Subscribe for more tales of defiance and share this to spark a conversation about fighting back. Thanks for joining this raw ride. Here's wishing you the courage to face your own battles and rise every time you fall.